Welcome to NASDAQ Trade Talks, where we meet with the top thought leaders and strategists in emerging technologies, digital assets, a regulatory landscape, and capital markets. I'm your host, Jill Malandrino, and joining me on the desk at the NASDAQ market site is Alan Taylor, managing partner at Endeavor Catalyst, Irina Birkin, CFO of Metallicus, and Sherry Chaney-Jones, founder and CEO of Sure Impact. We're here to discuss how market strategy, portfolio management, and emerging technologies are converging to shape the future of global business and investment. It is great to have everyone with us. Welcome to Trade Talks. And Alan, let's kick it off with you. If you can give a brief overview of where Endeavor Catalyst sits within the emerging tech ecosystem.
Oh, for sure. And thanks for having me. It's great to be here. Endeavor Catalyst is a $500 million venture capital fund that's operated by Endeavor, which is a global organization focused on the very best entrepreneurs in emerging markets all around the world. And so our fund actually invests in growing private companies, technology businesses in places like Brazil, Indonesia, all across Africa, the Middle East. We believe there are great entrepreneurs everywhere, and we're investing in them.
All right, and tell us about Metallicus, Irina.
Thank you for having me. Metallicus is a technology company, and we are building the blockchain solution for financial institutions through our banking innovation program.
All right, and Sherry, Sure Impact.
Yeah, Sure Impact is a technology platform disrupting the nonprofit government social sector space. We help government and nonprofits track, measure, and communicate their unique impact so they can make decisions on what really changes lives and changes circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, we have a well-rounded panel here certainly talk about emerging technology opportunities. Alan, what are some potential waves of innovation that you're seeing, whether it's specific sectors or emerging markets? You had mentioned some, around the world, LATAM, Africa. I've covered African markets, and the level of entrepreneurship and innovation there is really ripe.
Yeah, it's really inspiring to work with entrepreneurs from all these places because they are incredibly ambitious and incredibly resilient, right, to build businesses in all these kind of emerging economies. We do definitely see real trends and waves. And so, I think if you go back 20 years and you talk about emerging markets, everyone thought about China and India. Well, we're actually seeing the exact same thing play out in Brazil, in Indonesia, in Nigeria, in Egypt, Vietnam, Mexico, the list goes on. What you see in each market is the same kind of building blocks of technology get built. So first, e-commerce and consumer-facing businesses, then digital payments and infrastructure to support those businesses, and then tech coming to the bigger parts of the economy, financial services, beyond just payments, transportation, logistics, agriculture, et cetera. What's really interesting is that it kind of follows the same waves in every one of these places.
Yeah, and Irina, it's a great segue for my question to you. When you think about how traditional market structure and legacy institutions are evolving with digital assets and decentralized finance in today's environment, what are some of the trends that you're noticing?
So DeFi is definitely a trend, but it's not a trend. It should be taken very seriously. It is something that is here to stay. It has given access to individual and institutional investors to participate in the market through these new digital assets and ETFs, securities, tokenized securities. So this is definitely something that is worth paying attention to, whether there is regulatory environment that is conducive to it yet or not. There is definitely opportunities and guardrails for that.
Yeah, it certainly feels as if the industry has started to mature, especially as it's part of the national conversation right now when we think about the regulatory framework for digital assets. Sherry, what's interesting is when you think about the economy, geopolitics, and so forth today, and with the way emerging technologies are evolving, data is going to be at the center of all this, whether you're thinking about managing risk and going to market too quickly, or what that means from a governance and privacy perspective. How does this all come back to managing risk while driving innovation?
Yeah, so Sure Impact is focused on innovation in the social sector. So the sector that is the backbone of our societies, helping people move out of poverty, increase their wealth. And so Sure Impact is addressing a traditional market that has not typically been served by the technology sector, giving them, with better technology that we have today, more affordable technology, now we can actually be making policy decisions, government decisions on what social programs really do move the needle. How do we look at our using data to make people better off?
I mean, it's a great point that you make, accessibility at the end of the day. If you don't have access to it, how are you supposed to deploy all these grand plans that you have?
Yes,
right?
Absolutely.
Right, and Alan, that brings me to another point. When you think about collaboration between public and private sectors, you can have all of these new products and software at your disposal, but if you don't have the power to supply that demand, right, or if you're making those investments and supporting economic growth and growing out that infrastructure, there has to be a collaboration is what it seems to be.
Absolutely. I think if you look at the best success stories around the world, it's where the public and private sector work together, and particularly when governments actually consult entrepreneurs, right, and get their input on how to shape policy and how to shape regulation. I mean, I truly believe entrepreneurs are the ones who are building the future every single day. They're not only building the companies, but they're building sort of the economies that are going to be so important to these countries. And governments consulting them makes a huge difference. We've seen really good examples. Actually, fintech and DeFi is one. You know, the rules have to kind of change and evolve all the time around regulation. Well, the government, if you go back 10 years, in places like Brazil and Mexico, actually got input from entrepreneurs on how to shape their policies. And as a result, you know, in Brazil, they've really been able to flourish.
So when you think about Endeavor and how you're deploying capital with younger entrepreneurs, or if it's their first time bringing a company to the private market, public market, what have you, are you also advising them or giving them advice in terms of where to go and building a company and proper governance and managing balance sheets and so forth? Because that's a big part of it as well.
Absolutely, yeah. Endeavor, in fact, Endeavor's core business is actually mentoring and coaching aspiring, high potential, what we call high impact entrepreneurs. Right, so the main thing we've been doing for 25 years is identifying these very special entrepreneurs who are all around the world and then giving them advice on how to grow and scale their companies. It was actually only a decade ago that we added our own venture fund on top of our core programming. You know, so we have this fund now, but our core business remains really helping these entrepreneurs take their companies to scale.
Rita, what opportunities and challenges does it prevent when you're thinking about the integration of legacy institutions and DeFi when you're looking to disrupt the traditional financial ecosystem?
So the technology is really behind, but the technology is also what can really help the traditional financial institutions get ahead of what they want to do for their customers, their consumers, their investors, and the banking system as a whole. It is legacy, but everybody is very interested in bringing it back up to speed. And the blockchain technology is very powerful, and if it is used correctly, then it can really bring up the traditional finance to better speed.
Yeah, one of the challenges is, particularly in the U.S. with our legacy regulations, financial services, it's one of the most heavily regulated industries with the exception of healthcare in this country. So not only on a federal level, but the different state jurisdictions as well.
Right, and it's important to also understand that it's not like there is no regulation. I think it would be a mistake for somebody to say, I'm going to wait until there is clear regulation. There are clear regulations around financial services industries, which DeFi should be following. Anti-money laundering compliance, OFAC regulations, security, privacy, all of those things are in place. So it is important to understand that we're not building something that is completely new. We are within the certain guardrails, we're just bringing the technology up to speed.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. Even if you look at hiring standards and practices, the EEOC already has that regulatory framework in place. So whether you're using AI or a human to make those types of decisions, there are standards and procedure that you have to adhere to. Let's talk about predictive analytics when you're navigating uncertainty as the technology is evolving, the economic and political environments are evolving. How do you incorporate predictive analysis?
Yeah, so I think that's where the emerging technology is helping the social sector have better insights and data into what social programs are really going to change lives and change circumstances. And without the data, without the technology, without using predictive analytics, we waste a lot of money in this country or countries all around the world investing in programs that don't work. Or we think they work, we have a good idea that maybe this will work, but with technology, with data, with predictive analytics, we can now know that if we invest in this specific social cause, through these efforts, we'll now see true change, and then we can stop wasting money on things that aren't working.
But I think that's encouraging when you think about social impact, or even the broader issue around ESG, is that it could be very subjective and there's no way to quantify or standardize it as it exists right now.
Yeah.
So data-driven strategies, at least it's something in your toolbox to make a more educated, cost-effective ROI decision when you're deploying capital.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's no different than if you think about for-profit companies are always using financial metrics and other metrics to make decisions, or at least the most successful one are. So now we're empowering the social sector with the same level of sophistication, the same level of metrics about what their mission is, which is ultimately to change lives and change circumstances.
Right, and Alan, I'm sure it's the same way that you think about when you deploy capital, whether it's in an advanced market or an emerging market. At the end of the day, you don't want to put money behind something unless there's a problem to solve, right? You don't want to attach AI or blockchain to your name just because that's the narrative.
Unless you're fundraising in Silicon Valley,
Well,
then maybe you do want to add AI,
Right.
to go on. No, absolutely right. In fact, it resonates a lot what you're saying because Endeavor itself is a 501c3 nonprofit, but we've tried to become incredibly data-driven around understanding what interventions and what kind of work actually matters, right, in helping entrepreneurs scale.
Yeah.
And same when we invest, right? We don't pretend that we know the answer to what Brazil or Egypt needs next, but we think the entrepreneurs do, right? And so we really do seek to kind of follow the businesses and the trends that will make the biggest difference over time.
And that's why I'd asked the question before regarding how you're advising these companies, because we saw what happened in the public markets 2021, 2022, where it was growth at all costs, and we saw what happened when these companies got to the finish line.
Yeah.
In a way, that valuation reset needed to happen.
Absolutely.
Where governance matters, clean balance sheets matter, investing in the right tech stack, R&D, other resources, these things do matter.
100%. And look, I think it's the people you can put around these companies as they scale. And also, I would, as a point of emphasis, say it's playing for the long term. Because that's not what you can do in 1 quarter or 1 year. It's what you can do in 10 years, right? And we've seen that in some of Endeavor's biggest success stories. We supported for years a business in Latin America called Mercado Libre.
Oh, of course, a NASDAQ
It's a
listed company.
NASDAQ listed business, right? We worked with them all the way from 1997 when they started till they went public on the NASDAQ in 2007. And we continue to work with them. And when they went public, they were a little under $1 billion business. Today, they're a $100 billion market cap
They're a
company.
NASDAQ 100 company.
And I guess that's part of what Endeavor's on a mission is to show that you can build a company of that size and scale from a place like Argentina, right? You can kind of do this from anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? You could have one in your portfolio right now that could be the next Mercado Libre, and it's almost as those markets are untapped. You can almost leapfrog in a way over some of the legacy
Absolutely.
assets that you have to work out in a developed market such as this.
I mean, the waves I was mentioning, so Mercado Libre is that for Latin America. Well, today we're actually helping smaller companies, younger companies, try to grow up to be the Mercado Libre of Pakistan, right? Or the Mercado Libre of Vietnam, right? And I think that's what it's all about.
And Irina, I think one thing we tend to think very US or Western centric, but when it comes to DeFi and digital assets, there are billions of people around the world who in fact transact this way when they're growing microeconomies or they're sending cross-border payments when they don't have the central banking system. So this is in effect how microeconomies are growing.
So, another buzzword from the Silicon Valley is banking the unbanked, which could mean many different things. And one of the things is access to banking for people in countries, we're very fortunate here in the US, but perhaps in other countries, who don't have the same access and they can't grow their business, they can't improve their lifestyles. This also goes for companies. I'm sure, you have companies in your portfolio that would be struggling, and if they didn't have access to banking, then they wouldn't be able to grow. So DeFi really helped that, and I think the more regulation and the more they become similar to TradFi, similar to financial institutions, the more acceptable this process will be, and the more people will actually become banked.
Yeah, I mean, when we think about transitioning to a digital economy, at the end of the day, it's alternative forms of capital formation. You're going to have to get on board at some point. And again, making sure that it's in, a sustainable and socially acceptable way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what I'm excited about with technology, and especially in the social sector, is that we can now invest in the social sector more like VCs invest in startups, like Endeavor is doing, right? It's there's a term called trust-based, where we're understanding the nonprofits know how to run their companies, but we need the right accountability and the right metrics, which should be about what difference are they making, not about how many pins did they buy or how much money it takes to advertise to get something for their cause. It's about, are they making the change in the world that they said they are, and having those metrics so we can invest in high-performing
The trust is a really cool point because I think if you look back in history, we always did trust based on geographic proximity, right? You trusted the people who lived close to you in your village, in your town. But today we live in an era of sort of globally distributed, technology-enabled, trust-based networks, right? And that's going to happen more and more.
Yeah.
Let's take a step back for a moment here when you think about strategies for social impact. What is an example of a social impact investment, or how would one leverage Sure Impact's platform?
Sure. So I think a great example is a foundation called the Seymour Institute, and they're funding across 60 different markets in the U.S. Programs who are addressing child education outcomes based on keeping families stable in their own homes. Because when families have to move because they can't afford their rent, that child is moving to school, and that sets them back in academics. So they're using data related to what programs are most effective at keeping people from having to move out of their homes, increase their income stability, but all along the ultimate aim is to improve that child's educational outcomes so they can have a better future.
Which is so interesting because we talk about financial literacy and the lack thereof, particularly, I mean, in the U.S., right? It's not even part of American school system, but sometimes it's not even about what's a stock, how do I balance a checkbook or a ledger? I don't even know if anyone uses checkbooks anymore. but to your point, it could be as simple as how do you determine how you put food on the table, right? So it's not like it's a one-size-fits-all solution when it comes to social impact investing. So I think it's interesting that you made that distinction where it's not just about stock market 101 or credit cards and getting mortgages and stuff. It's more granular than that.
It is. I mean, if the amount of money you take in as a family doesn't stretch enough to pay your car payment, get to work, pay your mortgage, it doesn't matter how much you know how to balance a spreadsheet, the numbers just don't work out. So we need to employ strategies to help people increase their income so they can afford their rent and
narrow that wealth gap.
Yes,
which is why it's so great, all the work that you're doing, looking at emerging economies or economies that probably haven't had exposure to the type of services and advisory that you're providing.
And making sure that financial institutions don't take advantage of families and people that work really, really hard to put that money in their wallets and food on the table. And they can get, with DeFi, you can get that into your wallet a lot faster, a lot cheaper. There is less security issues and.
Well, there's transparency, and then you also run the inflation risk, either depending on what you're transacting. But that's a conversation for another time. To wrap up here, Alan, give us something positive, investor appetite, why they are looking for these new endeavors, if you will, pardon the pun.
Sure, no, the pun is accepted. If you work for an organization called Endeavor, you're ready for that pun. Look, I think there's a narrative out there that globalization is sort of on the retreat, or countries around the world are getting more protectionist, or governments are looking more inward. But I don't think the entrepreneurs got the memo, right? And I think if you work with entrepreneurs every day in all these different places, you just see people building truly global businesses, right? And a lot of them, are going to come list here in New York City, right? But it's the idea that you can kind of build global innovation from anywhere that I think gives us lots of reason for optimism and hope.
All right, thank you for everyone's insight. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks, and thanks for joining me from MarketSite. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at NASDAQ.